In a private Los Angeles athletic club in 1972, a heavyweight boxer laughed the moment Bruce Lee entered the room. He did not laugh softly. He laughed with the confidence of a man who had spent years being told that size was truth, reach was law, and one clean punch could solve any argument a smaller man tried to start. The boxer's name was Frank Mercer, a fictional heavyweight with shoulders like a doorframe and hands wrapped so heavily they looked less like fists and more like tools. He had broken noses, split lips, and ended arguments with men who weighed far more than Bruce. To Frank, speed was entertainment. Power was the only language that mattered. That afternoon, the gym smelled of leather, sweat, old wood, and liniment. Heavy bags swung slowly from the ceiling. Jump ropes slapped the floor. Men leaned against ring posts, pretending not to stare. Bruce had been invited for a private demonstration, but demonstrations become dangerous whenever ego enters the room before understanding. Frank saw Bruce standing near the ropes in a plain dark shirt, lean, calm, almost too quiet for a room built on impact. The boxer looked him up and down, then turned toward the others with a grin. It was the kind of grin that asks for permission to insult someone and already knows the room will grant it. "That's the famous fighter?" Frank said. "He looks like a featherweight who forgot to eat." A few men laughed immediately. Others waited to see how Bruce would respond. Bruce did not respond. He only looked at Frank, not with anger, not with fear, but with the unsettling patience of a man measuring distance before anyone else knows a fight has started. The laughter encouraged Frank. He stepped closer, rolling his massive shoulders, showing the room the difference in size like evidence presented to a jury. "I don't care how fast he is," he said. "If I touch him once, he goes down." That sentence changed the shape of the room, because everyone knew Bruce had heard it clearly. Bruce finally smiled, but it was not a friendly smile and not a mocking one. It was smaller than both. He asked Frank if he truly believed touching a man was simple just because the man was smaller. Frank spread his hands, inviting the whole gym to witness the obvious. "3 minutes, or," he said. "I only need one clean touch." Bruce nodded slowly. "Then take 3 minutes." The gym went quiet in a way boxing gyms rarely do. No bell had rung. No referee had stepped forward. Still, everyone understood that something had been agreed upon. Frank would try to touch Bruce once. Bruce would not try to hurt him. He would only move. That condition made Frank laugh even harder. To him, it sounded like mercy from the wrong direction. A smaller man refusing to strike a heavyweight felt ridiculous. He climbed through the ropes with the confidence of a storm entering a town that had no walls. Bruce followed without hurry, his face unchanged, his breathing invisible. The first 10 seconds were enough to make the room lean forward. Frank advanced with his guard high, left foot testing the canvas, right hand waiting behind his cheek. Bruce stood just outside range, not far enough to look safe, not close enough to be reached. It was the cruel distance where confidence begins to turn into calculation. Before the first exchange, the men around the ring still believed they understood what would happen. Frank would pressure him, trap him, touch him, maybe laugh again. Bruce would retreat, survive, perhaps prove quick for a few moments. That was the story size had taught them, but size had never taught them how to read intention. Frank threw a lazy jab to test the air. It was not meant to hurt. It was meant to confirm ownership. Bruce was there, and then he was not. The glove passed through the space where his head had been, missing so cleanly that for half a second, Frank looked less like a puncher and more like a man shaking hands with absence. A small sound moved through the gym. Not applause, not laughter. Recognition, maybe. Surprise with its mouth closed. Frank reset quickly, pretending the miss meant nothing. Boxers miss. Everyone misses. But there are misses that feel ordinary, and there are misses that feel as if the other man knew before your shoulder knew. Frank stepped in harder. A second jab snapped forward, this one faster, sharper, carrying irritation. Bruce slipped outside it by inches, not feet. That detail mattered. He was not running. He was not escaping. He was staying close enough to make Frank believe the next punch would land, then removing himself at the final possible moment. The third punch came with anger inside it. Frank threw a right hand that would have shaken most men through the spine. Bruce was already gone. His feet made almost no sound. His shoulders barely moved. The punch cut empty air, and Bruce appeared beside Frank's lead arm, calm enough to place two fingers lightly against the boxer's ribs. The touch was not a strike. It was a message. Frank felt it and twisted toward him, but Bruce had already stepped away. The men around the ring stopped smiling. The difference between hitting hard and arriving first had appeared in front of them, and it was not theoretical anymore. Frank's face tightened. The game no longer felt funny. Again, Frank said. Nobody had called time. Nobody needed to. Bruce returned to the center as if he had not moved at all. Frank began bouncing now, trying to look loose, trying to turn embarrassment into rhythm. But rhythm is dangerous when another man hears it before you do. Bruce watched without blinking. The boxer changed tactics. He feinted with the left, dipped his shoulder, and tried to hook with the right. Bruce did not bite on the feint. His body seemed to answer only what was real. The hook swept behind him, missing by a distance so small that the crowd felt the danger and the impossibility at the same time. A trainer at ringside whispered something under his breath. Another man told him to be quiet. They were beginning to understand that noise could disturb what they were watching. This was not a fight in the usual sense. It was a lesson being written in missed punches, and every miss made Frank heavier inside his own body. Frank tried to corner him. That was sensible. A ring gives a smaller man space only until the bigger man steals it. Frank cut left, stepped right, used his shoulders like gates closing. Bruce allowed the corner to come near, close enough that several men inhaled. Then he turned his hips once, and the trap belonged to nobody. The rope brushed Bruce's back for an instant. Then he was beside Frank again. No panic, no wasted leap, no desperate scramble. Just a change of angle so economical that it looked unfair. Frank's glove hit the top rope instead of flesh. The rope shook. Bruce did not. That contrast worked on the room like a warning. The heavyweight looked at the rope as if it had betrayed him. Then he looked at Bruce. The smile was gone now. In its place came the first honest expression of the afternoon. Confusion. Big men can handle resistance. They expect resistance. What unsettles them is when the target refuses to become a target at all. Bruce raised one hand slightly, palm open, not taunting, not inviting, simply indicating that Frank could continue. The gesture angered Frank because it was too calm to be disrespectful and too clear to ignore. He had wanted fear. He had wanted flinching. Instead, he was being given permission by the smaller man to keep failing publicly. The next rush was brutal. Frank abandoned style for pressure. 2 jabs, a right cross, a body hook, then another hook upstairs. The punches came with the sound of leather cracking air. Bruce moved through them as if the punches had shadows he could see before they arrived. Not one glove touched him cleanly. Somebody near the back said, "How is he doing that?" Nobody answered. The honest answer would have sounded too simple and therefore unbelievable. He was not reacting to punches. He was reading the body before the punch became a punch. The foot, the hip, the breath, the shoulder, the hunger to land. Frank backed away and shook his arms loose. Sweat had begun to appear along his forehead. This bothered him more than the misses. He had expected to chase a smaller man for 3 minutes and end the game early. Instead, the first minute had made his arms feel heavier and his certainty feel smaller. Bruce stood near the center line, still quiet. The gym had changed around him. At the beginning, the room belonged to Frank's laughter. Now the room belonged to Bruce's stillness. That is the strange power of control. It does not always make noise. Sometimes it removes noise until everyone can hear their own doubt breathing. Frank's coach, an older man with tired eyes, leaned toward the ropes and told him to shorten the punches. "Don't chase his head," the coach said. "Cut the ring." Frank nodded, but his pride heard something else. It heard that he needed advice against a man he had mocked less than 2 minutes earlier. He came forward again, this time more carefully. The crowd sensed the change. Carefulness from a heavyweight can feel more dangerous than rage, because it means the lesson has finally reached him. Frank stepped, paused, stepped again, trying to freeze Bruce with patience. But patience copied from fear does not become strategy. Bruce shifted his weight half an inch. Frank reacted to that half inch as if it were a full step. His glove twitched, his shoulder rose, and Bruce saw everything. He slid outside the line and tapped Frank's lead wrist. The tap was soft, almost insulting because it revealed how early Bruce had known what was coming. Frank cursed under his breath. That curse mattered. It was the first sound he made that did not belong to confidence. He threw again, sharper this time, trying to erase the tap, trying to restore the simple world where bigger men reach smaller men, because the universe respected weight. Bruce let the glove pass and touched his chest lightly. The touch landed over Frank's heart. Again, not a strike. Again, a message. The boxer froze for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction, the room understood more than it had understood in all the laughing before. Bruce could touch him whenever he wanted. Frank still could not touch Bruce once. The rules had been chosen by Frank. That made the humiliation cleaner and harder to deny. No one had asked him to knock Bruce out. No one had asked him to win a fight. He had asked for one touch. One. And the smaller man had turned that simple request into a mirror. Bruce did not celebrate. That made it worse for Frank. If Bruce had smiled, Frank could have hated the smile. If Bruce had taunted him, Frank could have fought the insult. But Bruce offered nothing for anger to grab. He simply waited, forcing the boxer to stand alone with the truth his own challenge had created. The second minute began with Frank breathing through his mouth. His footwork grew louder. The canvas complained beneath him. Bruce's feet remained quiet. This difference began to dominate the room. One man announced every intention through weight, sound, and tension. The other removed intention until movement seemed to appear without warning. Frank threw to the body now. It was a smart adjustment. Head movement looks beautiful until the body has nowhere to go. His left hook dug toward Bruce's ribs. Bruce turned just enough. The punch slid past and Bruce's hand touched Frank's shoulder from the outside. Gentle, exact, impossible to ignore. Another murmur traveled around the ring. Men who had spent years in gyms understood what that shoulder touch meant. In real contact, it could have been a strike, a shove, a break in posture, an opening for something worse. Bruce was not merely avoiding Frank. He was arriving at Frank's weak points first. Frank looked toward his coach. That glance betrayed him. Fighters look at coaches between rounds. They do not look while the challenge is still alive unless the plan is dying. The coach said nothing this time. He had no simple instruction left. You cannot tell a man to hit what refuses to become late enough to be hit. Bruce finally spoke softly. You are trying to hit where I was? The sentence was quiet, but it reached every ear because the room had become hungry for explanation. Frank blinked. He understood the words, but not yet the depth. Bruce added, fighting is not chasing the past. Frank's jaw tightened. The teaching made him angrier than the misses. It is one thing to fail. It is another to be taught while failing. He rushed again, forcing Bruce toward the ropes. This time he cut the ring better. His angle was sharper. For 1 second, several men believed the lesson was about to end. Bruce let Frank believe it too. That was the cruelest part. He allowed the heavyweight to feel close, to feel the glove almost arriving, to feel the crowd leaning toward impact. Then Bruce dropped his weight, slipped under the line, and appeared behind Frank's shoulder before the punch had finished traveling. Frank spun around too late. The rotation cost him balance. Bruce could have struck him then. Everyone saw it. The opening was wide, clean, almost embarrassing. Instead, Bruce placed his palm lightly on Frank's back, just between the shoulders. It was the gentlest contact in the room, and somehow the most devastating. Frank stepped away as if the palm had burned him. Not physically, something deeper. A boxer understands distance like a musician understands rhythm. To be touched from behind inside a ring, while failing to touch the man in front of you, is to feel your map of reality tear down the middle. The room was completely quiet now except for Frank's breathing. Even the heavy bags seemed still. The men at the ropes no longer looked entertained. They looked educated against their will. Bruce returned to the center, lowered his hand, and waited again. He had not raised his voice. He had not thrown one hard blow. Frank wiped sweat from his eyebrow with the back of his glove. The clock had not saved him yet. There was still time left, and that was almost worse. A short humiliation can be blamed on surprise. A longer one becomes evidence. Every remaining second would either restore him or write the lesson deeper. He changed again. smaller now, more careful, less proud in his stance. For the first time, Frank tried not to win the room. He tried only to solve the man in front of him. That was when Bruce became even harder to touch, because honesty had removed the easy rhythm of Frank's aggression. Bruce moved less. That seemed impossible, but it was true. Earlier he had slipped, turned, angled, and vanished. Now he made the smallest adjustments, letting Frank's punches fail by inches. The smaller the movement became, the larger the difference appeared. Frank was spending everything. Bruce was spending almost nothing. A jab missed by the width of a hand. A hook missed by the width of a breath. A cross missed because Bruce's head was no longer where Frank's mind had placed it. The audience began to understand that speed was not the miracle. Timing was. Timing made speed look supernatural. Frank feinted low and came high. Bruce did not flinch low. He did not reward the lie. He waited for the truth, then stepped outside it. The glove passed close enough to move the air near his cheek. Bruce's eyes remained calm. That calm did more damage to Frank than any counterpunch could have done. The coach finally whispered, "Stop loading up." Frank heard him, but could not obey fully. Pride loads the body before the mind approves. Every time Frank wanted the punch to matter, his shoulder told Bruce the story early. Bruce read the story, stepped out of the ending, and left Frank swinging at a sentence already finished. The final minute began. Someone announced it quietly, but the room heard. Frank's face changed again. He knew the challenge was shrinking around him. 1 minute to touch a man once. 1 minute to rescue the laughter he had started. 1 minute to prove that weight could still command obedience from space. Bruce's expression did not change. This was what disturbed people most when they watched him closely. His calm did not look empty. It looked full. Full of attention, full of preparation, full of choices not yet made. Frank saw that calm and understood, perhaps for the first time, that he had mistaken quiet for smallness. The heavyweight came forward with everything he could still organize. He doubled the jab, stepped in behind it, and threw the right hand down the middle. Bruce slipped outside the jab, turned with the cross, and brushed the glove away with the smallest motion. He was close enough now for Frank to smell the sweat on his shirt. Frank tried to clinch. That too was natural. When striking fails, size tries to become a wall. He reached with both arms, hoping to grab, hold, smother, prove something through contact. Bruce folded under the reach and pivoted away before Frank's arms could close. The clinch captured nothing but air. The men at ringside exhaled together. This was no longer about boxing alone. It had become a study of freedom. Frank was powerful, but every plan required Bruce to be where power expected him. Bruce refused that appointment. He was present, then absent, then present again at an angle Frank had not been taught to imagine. With 30 seconds left, Frank stopped chasing for a heartbeat. He stared. Bruce stared back. There was no hatred between them now. Hatred requires the illusion that the other man is the problem. Frank was beginning to understand that his problem had entered the room with him, laughing, wearing his own face. He threw one more combination, the best one he had left. It was honest, compact, disciplined by exhaustion. For that reason, it came closer than the others. Bruce slipped the jab, leaned from the cross, let the hook pass over his shoulder, and stepped inside the final punch before Frank knew the door had opened. Bruce placed one finger against Frank's chest. The gesture froze the room. Not a shove, not a strike. Just one finger, exactly where a real blow could have gone. Frank looked down at it. His gloves were still raised. His arms were still powerful. But the smaller man had arrived first again. Nobody laughed. Nobody breathed loudly. The lesson had become too clear for noise. Frank lowered his gloves halfway, not in surrender exactly, but in recognition. He had not been beaten by force. That might have been easier to accept. He had been beaten by distance, timing, relaxation, and a mind that moved before his body could lie. The 3 minutes ended without a bell because nobody needed one. Time had done its work. Frank had touched ropes, air, frustration, and his own limits. He had not touched Bruce once. Bruce stepped back, giving him space to keep his dignity if he chose to take it. For a moment, Frank did not move. His chest rose and fell. Sweat ran from his temple to his jaw. He looked at Bruce, then at the men around the ring. Earlier, those men had laughed with him. Now their silence asked him what kind of man he would become after being shown the truth. Frank removed one glove slowly with his teeth. The room waited. A proud man can make humiliation worse by defending it. He can turn a lesson into an enemy. Frank had that choice in front of him. Everyone could feel it. Bruce did not pressure him. He simply stood there, allowing the choice to reveal the man. Finally, Frank extended his bare hand. It was not dramatic. It was not perfect. His pride had not vanished. Pride rarely disappears that quickly. But the gesture was real enough. Bruce accepted it. The handshake lasted only a second, yet it changed the memory of the afternoon from defeat into instruction. Frank said, "I couldn't touch you." Bruce nodded once. There was no need to repeat what everyone had seen. Then Frank asked the question that had been hiding beneath all the others. "How?" The gym seemed to lean closer. This was the moment after spectacle, when a room decides whether it came to be entertained or to learn. Bruce answered without performance. "You were trying to hit a place. I was watching intention." He touched his own shoulder lightly, then his hip, then his foot. The punch begins before the fist. The body tells the truth earlier than the hand. Frank listened because exhaustion had finally made room for humility. Bruce continued, "Power is important, but power arriving late is only noise." The sentence landed harder than many punches. Some men in the room looked down at their own hands. They had worshipped impact for years, and impact deserved respect. But now they were seeing that impact without timing becomes a door slamming after the person has left. Frank asked if speed was something a man was born with. Bruce shook his head. "Speed is partly body," he said. "But first, speed is removing what is unnecessary." He stepped once, slowly, showing the angle he had used. There was no mystery in the motion when slowed down. The mystery was in the discipline to make it natural. He showed how Frank's shoulder had lifted before the jab, how his breath had changed before the right hand, how anger had widened the hook, how pride had shortened his patience. Each detail was small. Together they had announced every punch before it arrived. Frank listened with the face of a man hearing his own secrets spoken aloud. The gym changed again, but this time quietly. The men who had wanted a contest were now receiving a lesson they could take home and fail at for years. That is the mark of real teaching. It does not end when the demonstration ends. It follows people back into their own practice and keeps asking questions. One young boxer asked whether Bruce could do the same thing against anyone. Bruce looked at him and said nothing for a moment. Then he answered, "Against anyone? No. Against anything predictable? Yes." That answer mattered because it refused the cartoon of invincibility. Bruce was not selling magic. He was explaining awareness. Frank laughed then, but not like before. This laugh was smaller, tired, almost grateful. "So I was predictable." Bruce's eyes softened slightly. "You were honest," he said. "Your body was honest even when your pride was not." The sentence gave Frank back something humiliation had taken, a path forward. The coach nodded at that. Coaches understand the value of a hard truth delivered without cruelty. He had seen strong men destroyed by mockery and improved by correction. Bruce's lesson had cut deeply, but it had not tried to leave Frank smaller. That difference separated discipline from domination. Frank climbed out of the ring more slowly than he had entered it. Earlier, he had come through the ropes like a storm. Now he came out like a student leaving a classroom he had not expected to enter. The room made space for him, not because he had won, but because he had accepted losing without lying about it. Bruce remained in the ring for a few more minutes, answering questions with gestures more than speeches. He showed distance with his feet. He showed relaxation with his shoulders. He showed how tension makes a punch visible. Every explanation returned to the same idea. The fight begins before the strike. A reporter in the corner scribbled notes, but even he seemed unsure how to write what had happened. Bruce Lee defeats heavyweight sounded false because no defeat had occurred in the ordinary sense. Heavyweight fails to touch Bruce Lee sounded closer, but still missed the point. The true headline was quieter. Arrogance met timing and learned respect. Outside the club, evening light settled over Los Angeles. Cars moved past as if nothing inside that gym had mattered. But to the men who had stood around the ring, the world had shifted slightly. They had seen size fail to guarantee contact. They had seen calm defeat pressure without needing to become cruel. Frank sat on a bench later, unwrapping his hands. The tape came loose in strips. His knuckles were still the same knuckles that had won fights and frightened men. Yet they looked different to him now. Tools are only as useful as the timing behind them. A hammer swung at empty airs, just weight moving through regret. He replayed the misses in his mind. The first jab, the rope, the palm on his back, the finger on his chest. Each memory carried a different kind of pain. Not the pain of being hit, but the pain of realizing that the thing you trusted most had been incomplete. Bruce passed by the bench on his way out. Frank stood almost awkwardly. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Frank said, "I thought little meant weak." Bruce looked at him and answered, "Many people do." He did not add more. The simplicity of the answer made it heavier. Frank nodded. "And quiet?" Bruce paused near the door. "Quiet means you can hear more." Then he left the gym. No pose. No final speech. No need to turn the room back toward himself. The lesson remained because he did not decorate it after it had already been understood. In the weeks that followed, the story moved through gyms the way all good gym stories move. Half whispered, half exaggerated, carried by men who claimed not to believe it, but repeated it anyway. The details changed. The meaning did not. A heavyweight had laughed at Bruce Lee's size, then spent 3 minutes unable to touch him. Some versions made Frank crueler than he was. Some made Bruce more theatrical than he had been. That is what happens when people retell silence. They add noise to make it easier to describe. But those who stood near the ring remembered the most important details clearly. The calm, the misses, the finger on the chest. The real power of the story is not that a smaller man embarrassed a larger one. That is too simple. The power is that Bruce revealed the weakness hidden inside certainty. Frank was not stupid. He was trained, strong, brave, and experienced. But experience can become a cage when it teaches a man that one kind of truth is the only truth. Bruce Lee's genius was not merely speed. Speed was the visible part, the spark everyone could point to. Beneath it was observation. Beneath observation was relaxation. Beneath relaxation was discipline. And beneath discipline was a refusal to worship any method so completely that it blinded him to what was actually happening. That is why the room went quiet. Not because a heavyweight looked foolish. Men had seen foolishness before. They went quiet because they had watched a familiar hierarchy collapse without violence. Bigger did not mean earlier. Louder did not mean stronger. Confidence did not mean awareness. Power did not mean control. Frank's failure became useful because he accepted it. That may have been the most important punch he never landed. A weaker man would have protected the old story at any cost. Frank allowed a better one to replace it. In that sense, he did not leave the gym defeated. He left with the first honest lesson of a different life. Bruce's lesson still matters because people continue to mistake noise for readiness. They mistake muscle for mastery, confidence for clarity, aggression for courage. But the body tells the truth. Under pressure, everything unnecessary announces itself. The raised shoulder, the held breath, the angry step, the desperate reach, the late decision. To move like water is not to be soft in the way weak people imagine softness. It is to refuse the shape your opponent expects. It is to arrive where the opening is, not where pride wants to stand. It is to understand that force matters most when it does not arrive late. The heavyweight wanted one clean touch because he believed contact would prove reality. Bruce gave him 3 minutes inside a deeper reality. He showed that the first battle is not fist against face. It is perception against assumption. The man who sees sooner does not always need to hit harder. By the end of the afternoon, nobody in that club was laughing at size anymore. They were thinking about distance. They were thinking about timing. They were thinking about how many punches in their own lives had been thrown at places, memories, and assumptions, instead of the truth standing directly before them. And somewhere in that silence was the reason Bruce Lee became more than a fighter. He turned demonstrations into questions. He turned challenges into mirrors. He made strong men examine the weakness inside strength, and proud men hear the fear inside pride. He did not only move faster than people expected, He made expectation itself too slow. Frank Mercer would fight again. He would still be big. He would still hit hard. But men who knew him later said he stopped laughing at smaller fighters. He watched feet more carefully. He listened to breathing. He shortened his punches. He learned slowly that respect is not politeness. Respect is accurate vision. That is the legacy of a moment like this. It is not found in the rumor that a heavyweight could not touch Bruce Lee. It is found in the reason. Bruce was not untouchable because he escaped the fight. He was difficult to touch because he understood the fight earlier than the man trying to start it. In the end, the lesson was simple enough to sound impossible. Do not chase where a man was. Do not worship the size of your own hand. Do not mistake anger for speed. Watch the intention. Remove the unnecessary. Arrive before the mistake becomes movement. That was Bruce Lee's gift, making the obvious feel revolutionary. The gym returned to noise after he left. Bags swung again. Ropes snapped. Men argued. Gloves hit leather. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm. But the rhythm was not exactly the same. Every man who had watched the demonstration now carried a question into his next punch. Am I moving or am I announcing myself? That question is why the story remains useful. A lesser legend gives people something to admire from a distance. Bruce Lee's legend gives people something to test in themselves. It asks whether strength can be quiet, whether confidence can listen, whether power can wait, whether a man can become faster by becoming less crowded inside. So when people remember the heavyweight who laughed, they should not remember only the laughter. They should remember what came after it. The silence was not humiliation alone. It was understanding arriving late, then staying. It was the moment a room built on impact learned that the most dangerous movement is sometimes the one that begins before anyone sees it. Bruce Lee did not need to knock Frank Mercer down to change him. He did not need a brutal finish, a broken jaw, or a roar from the crowd. He needed only 3 minutes, an honest challenge, and enough control to show that mastery is not the power to destroy. Sometimes mastery is the power to reveal, and that is why the story still carries weight. A heavyweight boxer laughed at Bruce Lee's size because he could only see what stood in front of him. For 3 minutes, Bruce showed him everything he had not learned to see. When it ended, the smaller man had barely touched him. The bigger man had been touched forever. Years later, stories like this would be repeated because they carried a lesson anyone could understand. Every person has trusted some advantage too much: size, title, reputation, anger, experience, talent. Then life moves half an inch, and the advantage misses. Bruce Lee's genius was making that half-inch visible before pride could explain it away. That afternoon was not about proving boxing wrong or kung fu right. Bruce never needed such a shallow victory. It was about proving that no system, no body, and no reputation can replace awareness. Frank brought a powerful weapon into the ring. Bruce showed him that the weapon was incomplete without timing, humility, and perception. The men who saw it did not leave with a new technique only. They left with a new standard. A punch was no longer just a punch. A step was no longer just a step. A pause was no longer empty. In Bruce's hands, even stillness became information, and information became power before impact ever arrived. That is why the story belongs inside the larger legacy. Bruce did not ask people to become copies of him. He asked them to remove illusion. He asked them to test what worked, abandon what merely looked impressive, and listen to the truth before pride made the body deaf to it. In many gyms, fighters learn to hit harder before they learn to see better. Bruce reversed that order. He understood that a powerful strike is only meaningful when it arrives at the right place at the right time. Without perception, power becomes a heavy door swinging after the visitor has already left. Frank's laughter was not evil. It was human. People laugh at what threatens the structure they trust. A small man who moves without fear threatens the religion of size. A quiet man who does not flinch threatens the performance of aggression. Bruce's presence threatened both before his body had moved at all. The more the story was retold, the less important the 3 minutes became as a measurement. 3 minutes was only the container. The real event was the change inside the witnesses. They came to see a smaller man tested. They left testing the assumptions that had made the challenge seem obvious. That is the kind of victory that lasts. A knockout ends when the body stands again. A lesson remains when the body returns to training. Frank could recover from embarrassment in a day, but he could not unsee what he had seen. He had touched the edge of another way to understand combat. And Bruce Lee, as always, stood at that edge with no interest in making mystery for its own sake. He wanted the mystery stripped down until it became practice. Watch sooner, move cleaner, waste less, respect more. That was the method beneath the legend, and that is why the legend keeps moving. For Frank, the most uncomfortable discovery was not that Bruce was faster, it was that Bruce was less crowded by anger, less crowded by vanity, less crowded by the need to prove every second. Frank had carried himself like a loaded weapon. Bruce carried himself like a clear answer, waiting patiently. That difference is why the demonstration still feels alive. It is not only about fighting, it is about every moment where a person charges forward with certainty and discovers that certainty is slower than awareness. Bruce Lee made that lesson visible inside a boxing ring using nothing more than distance, patience, and truth.